The money in your pocket feels simple, but it's a piece of paper backed by nothing but a promise. Have you ever wondered where that promise came from? How did we get from trading cows and shells to tapping a plastic card or sending invisible numbers across the globe? What if the entire system of money you rely on is just the latest experiment in a story thousands of years old? A story of power, control, and trust. What actually is money and what comes next? But before we dive in, if you're curious about how money shapes history, power, and society, subscribe to The Lore of Money. We explore the financial forces that change the world. To understand where money is going, we first have to understand where it's been. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a story about solving one of humanity's biggest problems. To see how we got here, we need to go back to a time before money even existed, a world built on a simple but deeply flawed idea. We need to look at the first great invention that tried to fix it, using things you could hold in your hand, like salt and cattle. Then we need to see how that physical value was replaced by a promise, a government decree that turned simple paper into wealth. And finally, we have to explore the radical new idea that tries to replace that government promise with pure mathematics. Let's start at the beginning, in a world without a single coin. Imagine you're a farmer who grows the best grain in the village. You work hard, you have plenty to eat, but your shoes have holes in them. You need new shoes, so you go to the shoemaker. The problem is, the shoemaker doesn't need grain. His family just harvested their own. He needs a clay pot for water, so now your journey isn't over. You have to find a potter who needs grain, trade your grain for a pot you don't want, then go back to the shoemaker and hope he still wants that pot. This is the world of barter. It's the direct trade of goods for goods, and it's a nightmare of inefficiency. The central problem is what economists call the double coincidence of wants. For a trade to happen, you have to find someone who has what you want, and at the same exact time wants what you have. In any society with more than a few people, this is incredibly rare. The economy is frozen by surge costs, the time and energy wasted just trying to find a match. But the problems with barter go even deeper. There was no common way to measure value. How many bushels of wheat is one cow worth? How many pairs of shoes for one clay pot? In an economy with thousands of items, you'd need millions of different price pairings. It makes planning, saving, or even knowing if you got a good deal almost impossible. Then there's the problem of indivisibility. Let's say you own a live sheep, and you only want to buy a small amount of rice. You can't exactly trade a leg of the sheep without destroying the value of the whole animal. Storing your wealth was also a huge challenge. Your wealth was your grain, your vegetables, your livestock. These things are perishable. They rot, they get sick, they die. They are expensive and difficult to store safely. You weren't storing purchasing power, you were just storing stuff and hoping it didn't spoil before you could trade it. This world, choked by the frictions of barter, was a world where economic growth was nearly impossible. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was a cage that limited human potential. To escape it, humanity needed a breakthrough, a new technology. And that technology was money. So how do you solve the chaos of barter? The first great leap forward was the invention of commodity money. This is a simple but brilliant idea. Instead of trying to trade everything for everything else, the whole society agrees to use one specific, widely desired good as a common medium of exchange. You no longer need to find a shoemaker who wants your grain. You just sell your grain for the accepted commodity and then use that commodity to buy whatever you want. The double coincidence of wants is solved. The key was that this money had intrinsic value. It was something useful or desirable all on its own, which is why everyone was willing to accept it. History is full of fascinating examples. In agricultural societies, one of the earliest forms of money was livestock. Cattle, sheep, and camels were valuable for their meat, milk, and labor. Owning them was a clear sign of wealth. The connection is so deep, it's still in our language today. The Latin word for cattle was pecus, which is the root of our modern financial words like pecuniary. In other places, different needs created different money. In regions far from the sea, salt was incredibly valuable for preserving food. Roman soldiers were famously paid a portion of their wages in salt, which gives us our word salary. In parts of Africa, India, and China, cowrie shells were used as currency for centuries. In North America, some Native American tribes used wampum, which were strings of beads made from shells. The value came not just from the shells, but from the hard work it took to craft them into beads. Even in modern times, when formal money systems break down, commodity money spontaneously reappears. In prisons or in post-World War II Germany, cigarettes became a common currency because they were standardized and in high demand. But these early forms of money were still deeply flawed. One cow is not the same as another. Grain can rot, salt can dissolve, and carrying around enough cattle or salt to make a large purchase was difficult and dangerous. Commodity money was a huge step up from barter, but it wasn't good enough to build empires or global trade on. For that, humanity needed something better. Something more durable, more divisible, and easier to carry. The problems with things like cattle and grain created a natural push toward a better form of money. Societies all over the world began to gravitate towards metals, especially precious metals like gold and silver. Why? Because they perfectly solved the flaws of earlier commodity money. Metals are incredibly durable. They don't rot or decay. They are easily divisible. You can cut a piece of gold in half without destroying its value. They are portable. A small amount can be worth a lot, making it easy to carry. And they are fungible, which is a fancy way of saying that 1 ounce of pure gold is identical to any other ounce of pure gold. Finally, they are naturally scarce, which helps them hold their value over time. For thousands of years, people traded gold and silver by weight, but this still had problems. Every time you made a trade, you had to bring out a scale, weigh the metal, and test its purity to make sure you weren't being cheated. It was slow and created opportunities for fraud. The next revolution changed everything. Around the 7th century BC, in the kingdom of Lydia, in modern-day Turkey, the first coins were invented. They were simple, bean-shaped lumps of a gold and silver alloy, but they had a crucial feature. They were stamped with a symbol, like a lion's head. That stamp was a promise from the king, a guarantee of the coin's weight and purity. This simple innovation was a game-changer. It meant you no longer had to pay by weight. You could pay by tale or by counting the coins. This dramatically sped up commerce, increased trust between strangers, and allowed markets to grow like never before. The idea of coinage spread like wildfire, perfected by the Greeks and then the Romans, who created the first truly monetized society. But giving the state a monopoly on creating money also created a powerful new danger. Rulers quickly realized they could cheat the system. This led to a practice called debasement. A king could recall all the coins, melt them down, mix in cheaper metals like copper, and then reissue more coins that looked the same but had less gold or silver in them. This was a hidden tax. It allowed the state to pay its soldiers and fund its wars without raising official taxes. This gave rise to Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good. When people saw there were two types of coins with the same face value, they would hoard the good ones with more precious metal and spend the bad, debased ones. This caused the quality of money in circulation to collapse, leading to inflation and economic chaos. The Roman Empire's slow decline was mirrored by the steady debasement of its currency. The real innovation of coinage wasn't the metal itself, but the information stamped on it. A coin was a piece of data, guaranteed by a trusted source. Debasement was an attack on that data, undermining the very trust that made money work. For thousands of years, money was a physical thing with real value. A gold coin was valuable because it was made of gold. But the next stage in money's evolution was a massive leap into the abstract. It was the birth of representative money that has no value of its own, but represents a claim on something valuable. This idea first emerged on a large scale in 7th century China. Transporting huge quantities of heavy metal coins for trade was dangerous and inconvenient, so merchants started leaving their coins with a trusted party and carrying paper receipts instead. These paper notes were easier and safer to carry, and they soon began circulating as money. A similar process happened in Europe, but with goldsmiths. Goldsmiths had the strongest vaults, so merchants would store their gold and silver with them for safekeeping. In return, they got a paper receipt. Soon, instead of going to the goldsmith to pull out heavy gold to settle a debt, a merchant could just hand over the paper receipt. The receipt itself became the money, because everyone knew it could be redeemed for real gold at any time. This led to a discovery that would change the world and create modern banking. The goldsmiths noticed a pattern. On any given day, very few people actually came in to demand their physical gold. New deposits were roughly equal to withdrawals. They realized they didn't need to keep 100% of the gold in their vaults. They only needed to keep a small fraction of it on hand to meet daily demands. So, they started to issue more paper receipts than they had gold to back them up. They would lend these extra receipts out to borrowers and charge interest, creating money out of thin air. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking. The system was no longer backed one-to-one by gold. It was backed by a small fraction of gold and a large amount of public trust in the goldsmith's promise to pay. Eventually, governments took over this system, creating what became known as the gold standard. Major currencies like the US dollar were defined by a fixed quantity of gold. You could, in theory, walk into a bank and exchange your paper dollars for a specific amount of physical gold. This created a stable anchor for the global financial system. But the key takeaway is that the value of money was no longer just about the physical stuff. It was about trust in an institution. The bankers weren't just lending gold, they were monetizing public confidence. This was a profound shift in power, away from a physical commodity and towards the institutions that controlled its paper representation. The age of money backed by gold finally came to an end in the 20th century. After World War II, the world operated on the Bretton Woods system. Most global currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar itself was pegged to gold at a fixed rate of 35 per ounce. America essentially promised the world that its dollars were as good as gold. But in the 1960s, that promise began to break. The US government was printing huge amounts of money to pay for the Vietnam War and expensive social programs at home. The number of dollars floating around the world exploded, but the amount of gold in America's vaults did not. Other countries started getting nervous. They began to exchange their dollars for America's gold, and the US gold reserves started to shrink dangerously. The system was about to break. So on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and announced he was closing the gold window. He unilaterally ended the ability to convert US dollars into gold. This event, known as the Nixon shock, severed the last link between money and any physical commodity. This pushed the entire world into the modern era of fiat money. The word fiat is Latin for "let it be done." Fiat money is money that has value simply because a government declares it to be legal tender. A dollar bill has no intrinsic value, it's just paper and ink. You can't eat it or build with it. Its value comes entirely from the shared belief and trust in the stability of the US government that issues it. That trust is enforced because the government demands that you pay your taxes in its currency, which creates a permanent demand for it. This new system gave enormous power to central banks like the US Federal Reserve. Freed from the discipline of gold, they could now manage the economy by printing more money or changing interest rates. This flexibility allows them to fight recessions by making money cheaper and easier to borrow. But this power comes with a monumental risk. Without the anchor of a physical commodity like gold, there is a constant temptation for governments to print money to pay for their spending. This leads to inflation, which is a slow and silent theft of your purchasing power. The value of your savings slowly erodes over time. The shift to fiat money was a deliberate trade-off. We exchanged the long-term stability of gold for the short-term flexibility of government control. We chose to put our faith not in a scarce metal, but in the wisdom of human institutions. The history of the last 50 years, with its cycles of boom, bust, and inflation, is the story of how that choice has played out. Once money became a pure government abstraction, the next evolution wasn't about what money was, but how we used it. This was the digital acceleration, the slow disappearance of physical cash into electronic data. It was a revolution in convenience, driven by technology. The first big step was the credit card. While early versions existed, the modern era began in the 1950s and 60s with cards from Diners Club, Bank AmeriCard, which became Visa and American Express. At first, they were clumsy. But technology quickly improved. The invention of the magnetic stripe in the 1970s, the more secure EMV chip in the 80s, and finally contactless tap-to-pay technology made plastic cards faster and safer than cash. At the same time, the banks themselves were transforming. The first ATMs appeared in the late 1960s, letting people get their money 24/7. Then came the internet. In 1995, banks like Wells Fargo launched the first websites that let you check your balance and transfer funds from your home computer. Finally, the smartphone put a powerful bank branch in everyone's pocket. Mobile banking apps and digital wallets like Apple Pay made it possible to live your financial life almost entirely without touching a coin or a banknote. But here is the critical part that is often overlooked. This story of increasing convenience for you was also a story of increasing control for the system. A cash transaction is anonymous. It's peer-to-peer. It leaves no record. But every single digital transaction you make is different. It's not a direct payment. It's a message that goes through a chain of powerful intermediaries, the merchant, their bank, the card network like Visa or MasterCard, and your bank. Every tap, every swipe, every online purchase creates a permanent, searchable data record inside this centralized banking system. So as money became less physical, it became more visible to the institutions in charge. This shift brought incredible efficiency. But it also concentrated immense power and surveillance capabilities within the established financial system. Every step away from physical cash was a step towards a world where every transaction could be monitored, tracked, and potentially controlled. This set the stage for a powerful counter-reaction. A new idea that sought to use technology not to perfect the centralized system, but to escape it entirely. In the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, public trust in banks and governments was shattered. It was in this environment that a mysterious person or group, using the name Satoshi Nakamoto, released a white paper for a radical new invention, Bitcoin. It was described as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. This wasn't just another app for sending dollars. It was a completely new, self-contained monetary system, built from the ground up to operate without any bank, without any company, and without any government. It was an attempt to reinvent money using cryptography and computer science. Bitcoin's core innovation is the blockchain. Think of it as a global public record book, or a ledger, that is shared and maintained by a network of thousands of computers all over the world. This ledger is made of a chain of blocks, and each block contains a list of recent transactions. Because the ledger is distributed everywhere, there is no single point of failure and no single person in charge. Once a transaction is added to the blockchain, it is cryptographically sealed, making it effectively impossible to alter or delete. This creates a permanent, unchangeable history of every transaction ever made. Unlike every form of money that came before it, Bitcoin is completely decentralized. There is no CEO, no central bank, no board of directors. The network is run by a global community of volunteers. New transactions are verified and added to the blockchain by miners, who use powerful computers to solve a complex mathematical puzzle. This process is called proof of work, and it ensures the network remains secure and honest. Most importantly, Bitcoin's monetary policy is written directly into its code. The total supply is strictly limited to 21 million coins, ever. The rate at which new coins are created is cut in half roughly every 4 years in an event called the halving. This creates provable digital scarcity, a direct contrast to fiat currencies which can be printed in unlimited amounts. In a strange way, Bitcoin is a leap forward that looks backward. The long history of money was a journey away from physical things. Your bank account isn't money you own, it's an IOU from the bank. It's a promise. Bitcoin reverses this. To own Bitcoin is to control its private cryptographic key. It gives you direct, sovereign ownership of the asset itself, just like holding a gold coin in your hand. It digitally recreates the hard scarcity of a precious metal. It's an attempt to combine the timeless properties of gold scarcity and direct ownership, with the modern advantages of a digital network, instant global settlement, and perfect divisibility. It is an entirely new kind of money, built on algorithmic trust instead of institutional trust. So, where does this leave us? The evolution of money has brought us to a fascinating moment in history, with two completely different systems operating in parallel. On one side, we have the fiat system, the government-decreed money that runs the world today. Its value is based on trust in institutions like the Federal Reserve. Its supply is unlimited and controlled by a small group of people. Transactions are reversible, but they require intermediaries and can be censored. On the other side, we have Bitcoin. Its value comes from network consensus and its mathematically provable scarcity. Its supply is absolutely finite, fixed at 21 million. Its transactions are peer-to-peer and irreversible. They are radically transparent on a public ledger, yet highly resistant to censorship. This presents a fundamental trade-off. The fiat system offers flexibility and stability, giving governments tools to manage the economy, but at the cost of constant inflation and the risk of control. The Bitcoin system offers predictability and freedom, a system with fixed rules and no rulers, but at the cost of high price volatility and an inability to intervene in a crisis. So, what happens when you have to trade cows for shoes, or trust a king's stamp on a piece of metal, or believe a government's promise about a piece of paper? The long journey of money has always been a quest for a better tool to cooperate, a search for a better form of trust. We moved from trusting the intrinsic value of a physical commodity to trusting the authority of a human institution, and now we are experimenting with trusting the logic of open-source code. This evolution is far from over. The established system is already responding, with corporations creating stablecoins, pegged to the dollar, and governments exploring their own central bank digital currencies. A central bank digital currency would be a digital version of the dollar, issued directly by the state. It would combine the technological form of a cryptocurrency with the centralized control of the fiat system. The fundamental questions that have driven this story for thousands of years are now more relevant than ever. What is value? Where does it come from? And most importantly, who do we trust to control our money, the politician or the protocol? The future of money will be defined by the answer we choose.